Welcome to another Tech Tuesday webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today, our topic is going to be Azure governance done right. Today, we're joined by a number of different core tech representatives here. We have Robert Lovelace, one of our solution architects. We have Chrissy Shell. I practiced this beforehand and I'm messing it up. Chrissy Shell and Richard Sedlak. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put those into the chat. We will get to those at the end of the presentation. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Robert and let him go ahead and run through the presentation that we have prepared for you today.
Thanks, Kevin, and welcome everybody. I'm pretty excited to share a little bit about Azure governance and really giving you some fundamentals as far as what you need to know when looking at either maturing your existing Azure environment or looking at migrating resources to Azure. As far as our agenda goes today, we've already gone through introductions. We're going to get into the cloud adoption motivations. So for those of you that don't have resources in Azure, kind of some high-level motivations as to what we see most of our customers are facing when looking at moving resources to Azure and why are they moving those resources to Azure. Then we're going to get into the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework. It's you may have heard of it before, also referred to as the CAF, so the acronym CAF. It's really driven by governance and the foundations of developing that baseline in Azure for your governance. Then we're going to get into creating that balance and what that involves, cloud governance model, native governance tools in Azure, and then our managed services. I'll be handing it over to Richard and Chrissy to talk to us about what we do for our managed service customers and how we handle and manage governance. And then at the very end, we'll open it up to questions. So when we talk about the cloud adoption motivations, there's three typical categories that we see that everything relates back to when moving resources or looking to move resources to the cloud. There's business motivations, and that includes a data center exit, mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, capital versus operational expense realignment. There's also migration motivations. So there's that total cost of ownership and cost savings, reduction in vendor and technical complexities, optimization and internal operations, increased business agility. And then we have innovation motivations, new technical capabilities, scaling to meet market demands and scaling to meet market geographical demands. So these are the typical motivations that we see within our customers as to why we're looking at moving resources to Azure. And with a lot of our engagements, whether it's a cloud economic assessment, cloud foundations assessment, or a cloud adoption framework, we're looking at the business motivations because we want to understand how your business is looking to use their infrastructure, or how they use it today, and how they look to use that infrastructure in the future, because that allows us to understand where we need to leverage things such as Azure Blueprints for streamlining and being able to easily stamp and repeat workloads for workloads that will be spun up frequently, as well as looking at matching workloads to infrastructure as a service versus platform as a service. So us as core tech aligning to your motivations to moving to Azure is a key part of our engagement. So now I want to kind of get into talking about the cloud adoption framework. So again, like I said earlier, it's also referred to as the CAF engagement. So this is really where most of our migrations start, and it's after we get into the understanding of the kind of the assessment of the your current workloads. We then move into preparing us for a migration to the cloud. So as part of that getting ready, we need to establish our landing zone in Azure And when we're building out that landing zone, we need to discuss things like governance. So this is really where we get into talking about methodologies and some best practices, and really developing that the plan for how we move forward. So in the cloud adoption framework, all of the resources that we end up migrating into our Azure space or our subscription, we want to do it in a way that our baseline is carried throughout. So we understand that baseline. We have those discussions on what our methodology will be, and then that baseline is then carried into every resource that we move into Azure, so that we know that everything has and meets our baseline for security governance, for cost governance. And then as we begin to move into more of a managed stage, or and we complete that migration, is where we start to mature and operationalize our governance even further. So I had mentioned creating the balance. So what we're trying to achieve when we talk about governance is creating a control and stability with everything that we do in our Azure environment, but with having a good balance with speed and results. We don't want to over control our resources and our settings so that it affects our end user, so that it affects our ability to be agile, because that is one of the great that is one of the great items that we strive for with moving to Azure, is being able to be the agility that we gain, so we can spin resources up very quickly. So I know I had mentioned it earlier with Azure Blueprint, developing proper blueprints for resources that we spin up frequently will keep that speed and that governance in line, and keeping that balance, so that it is critical in having that. So again, when we're talking through the CAF governance model, and this is something that that Microsoft has pulled together and that they have on their website. And again, the cloud adoption framework is a really common engagement that we have with customers when preparing for cloud migrations. We start with talking about corporate policy, and really understanding what you have today and what are the tangible risks throughout the corporate policy that you guys have identified, but also trying to understand what might be unidentified. And then aligning those to the 5 disciplines or pillars of cloud governance. And that would be cost management, security baseline, resource consistency, identity baseline, and deployment acceleration. And then within each of those disciplines, there's a team that supports those. So it's really working with that team and helping develop a potential new team as part of this engagement, and that's your cloud governance team. And the cloud governance team really works with each of the individual disciplines to help understand how governance affects cost management, the security baseline, that resource consistency, the identity baseline, and deployment acceleration. So earlier when I was talking about the developing blueprints in Azure, that really touches into each of these 5 pillars. And we know right off the bat what is our necessary size for this type of workload. So that cost management is already predetermined because we know the necessary size for this repeated workload that we spin up. From a security baseline, we know what types of security enablements we need in order to keep this, to have that baseline, in order to have the baseline for security for this type of resource. From resource consistency, because it's a blueprint, we're doing everything in a stamp and repeat type model. So it's a very consistent each time we build it. From an identity baseline, we already know what types of resources will have access because this has all been predetermined. And then deployment acceleration, it's as simple as once the blueprint is created, clicking a deploy button, and it will deploy the same way every time. And then you can spin it up and spin down, and that aligns great with the cost management, again, because it is a pay for what you eat model. And what I mean by that is when that resource is running, you're paying for it. And when it is not running, you don't have to worry about paying for it. So we'll see a similar compute resource spun up, a similar data resource spun up every time we run this blueprint. Again, aligning to all 5 pillars of the Azure governance model. And it's important to have that cloud governance team as that cohesivity between each of these disciplines to make sure that we are getting the right types of governance, and we're talking to the right types of security baselines within each. So there are a number of tools in Azure natively that help us align to each of these pillars within the cloud governance. So you'll notice on the left in cost management, and really throughout every pillar, it talks to Azure Blueprints, and that was what I was spending quite a bit of time focusing on. Another one that you'll see pop up very frequently is Azure Policy. So establishing and developing those best practices in policy. There's Azure Cost Management, Azure Advisor, all relating to cost management. And then as we get into business risks and the security baseline, you can get into Azure Security Center or Azure Sentinel, as well as for resource consistency. We can monitor these resources with Azure Monitor, and Azure Advisor will give us recommendations that we can then implement for these resources. Developing an identity baseline using role-based access or RBAC. And then we also have for deployment acceleration, the Azure Resource Manager templates, as well as resource grouping and tagging. CoreTech has also developed a tool that allows us to build some best practices and some governance around cost management, and we'll get into that in just a minute here. We call that tool the Azure Management Suite. But Richard, help me out here and tell me a little bit about some of the policies that we can set in Azure Policy that will help us align to building and developing that governance best practice.
Sure. Some of the policies that you can use, some are built in and some can, of course, can be customized, but some built-in ones are no more than 3 owners to a subscription to control your securities to who can manage the environment. Another one you can use is to limit the types of virtual machines that you can deploy so you can control costs so that people just can't build themselves, a GPU-based log reader or something like that. So you can do those types of things. You can even control for tags that have to be in and audit against those so that you can have, help down the line be able to do that look back, charge back kind of modeling by just flagging resources that don't have the required tagging.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. So as part of those policies that Richard was speaking to, when you build your blueprints, you can have your blueprints contain these policies as part of them, so that this resource that's part of this blueprint automatically has this tagging or automatically has this role-based access or these policies that limit the number of resources that have access to the environment. So again, and really why this is so important is if you start with a good baseline in governance, it will really help you to expand your Azure environment with as little end user or business impact as possible as your environment grows. So now I want to get into Cortex managed services and our Azure governance that we do within our managed services And Richard, I'll kick it over to you to talk about our Azure Management Suite.
So our Azure Management Suite was in-house built here at CoreTech. It's something we have and we provide all of our customers. And what it provides you, of course, is that it does a roll up and it shows you how you're trending in terms of costing. So it'll show you your predicted your actual and predicted forecasting. So you can do budget management and alerting. It'll allow you to actually interact with our staff to create and manage support tickets and communicate with us that way. It also has integration in some cloud native tools such as Security Center and Azure Advisor. So it'll bring that information up to a single dashboard so you can actually help plan, manage, and just look at everything in terms of that first governance dashboard for yourself. And so that's what that tool does. Moving on, we also have other tools that we use. In particular, we do a scorecard review, which is based on not only Azure, but also Logic Monitor with our own special sauce that we've been bringing in. And so we'll create a scorecard that combines the business, the technical, and all the governance data into a single view that we can actually pull up on demand. And so we will review this weekly, monthly, as well as quarterly. Okay, and it highlights things that we can put in, highlights things such as your business risks that you want to track, any cost management optimization that we're trying to, that we have as an objective for you. It will help us make recommendations for any automation and improvements that can happen through there. For example, automating the shutdown of, say, development resources that you're, only using 5x8. It will help us provide you a security baseline as well as a remediation plan. We can see the certificates that are out there on your website, so we can get to them and fix them renew them before they become a problem and your website suddenly shut down. And it is also an ITIL compliant system, so it helps us with incident, events, problem, any change management, so that we can continue providing you just service improvement, week after week, month after month, and that sort of thing.
In the AMS portal, just stepping back real quick, we provide that as a value add to all of our CSP customers that we have today. So for any existing CSP customers that we have today, part of the why CoreTech, why come to our CSP value add is that AMS portal. It's a free tool for you, for a portal for you to view all of your resources, assets, to gain that financial understanding and then governance as well. So you can review tagging. You can actually break down costing by tagging. You can get an understanding of change, any recent changes to that subscription. So there's a lot of great value, and we do demonstrations of that AMS tool on a regular basis for our customers. If you would like a demonstration of the tool and you haven't gotten one yet, or if you have gotten one and you'd like a refresher, or maybe you have a coworker that hasn't gotten one yet, please send an email to cspsupport@coretech.com and request an AMS demo, and we can get that scheduled for you. And on that note, any questions that we have from the audience?
Let's take a look here and see what's been submitted so far. First question up is, how can I know where I stand today with my current Azure governance and identify some areas to focus on?
It's actually a great question. So Microsoft has built an Azure governance assessment tool, and it's a questionnaire, and you can find it at cafbaseline.com, and that's the Cloud Adoption Framework. So cafbaseline.com, and you go through the assessment tool, self-assessment. It starts with you identifying what type of organization you are, your roles in the organization, and what some of your organization's focuses are when looking at Azure resources or what you're doing in Azure. And then what it does is, at the end of it, it gives you a PowerPoint or a PDF export of graphical slides where you can actually see where your organization is up to standards for the type of organization that you are. So where you're meeting those standards, where you're exceeding those standards, and where you're below those standards. So areas that you need to focus on, as well as what types of recommendations they're making that will help you improve and identify and really understand those areas that require focus.
Great. We have another one here just asking, how can I learn more about tagging resources in Azure and best practices?
Yeah, another great question. So Microsoft has some great articles, and I'm going to point you to a similar location. So there's, again, back on the Cloud Adoption Framework websites within Microsoft, there's some documentation, and here you can learn all about the best practices with tagging resources. There's different types of resources that you can tag. There's different ways that you can tag. And this will really go into the best practices and really show you how you can do each of those different ways or tag those different types of resources. Additionally, we can engage in a strategy and planning workshop. So that would be between you and CoreTech, and we can often get these Microsoft funded. Or a governance workshop that we can often get Microsoft funded. And that's where we can educate you in a one-on-one session, but also if you have resources in Azure today, which it sounds like you might if you're trying to figure out how to tag them, we can help develop those best practices and really get you started on the right foot.
Great. Well, that looks like that's it here currently for questions. Not seeing anything else come through on the chat side of things. So I just want to thank all of the attendees today for joining, and I also want to thank our presenters here for walking us through this presentation around Azure governance. We'll be sending out an email of this recording following the completion of the webinar, so it'll probably be going out here either this evening or tomorrow morning, so be on the lookout for that. And that'll include also the link to download the slide deck here. And I might just drop in the questions and answers that we went over here too in the Q&A section too, just add those as some additional slides so you have that information available, because I know Robert mentioned some good resources there that we'll just make it super easy for you guys to access those. So again, want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Thank you to the team for presenting, and we will catch you next week. I think we're doing an app modernization webinar next week. So if you want, you can of course stop by coretech.com/events and go ahead and register for that upcoming webinar. But be on the lookout for the recording, and we will talk to you later. Thank you all very much, and have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.